If you need to know, now. If you're asking, what's next? If the latest is vital. If you have to follow every development. If you want every headline, anytime. If the story matters wherever you are. If the news is part of your life, keep it with you.
Hello, this is BBC World News. I'm Naga Munchetty. Here are the headlines. In just a few hours, the people of the Netherlands will have their first king for more than 100 years. Queen Beatrix is going to abdicate in favour of her eldest son, Willem Alexander. His Argentine wife, Maxima, will become queen. The American student who was cleared of murdering British student Meredith Kercher in Italy 3 years ago has protested her innocence on American television. Last month, the Italian authorities overturned Amanda Knox's acquittal and intend to retry her. Two international companies have said that survivors who worked for their suppliers in the Bangladesh textile factory, which collapsed last week, and relatives of those who perished will be compensated. Michael Jackson's family has been outlining its case against concert promoters AEG. The family claims that the company was responsible for hiring Dr. Conrad Murray, who was convicted of killing Jackson. The family is suing AEG for hundreds of millions of dollars. Those are the latest headlines from BBC World News. Now for the financial news with Sally. Taking responsibility, Canadian retailer Loblaw joins Primark in saying it will compensate victims of the Bangladesh factory collapse. And BP gets set to announce a sharp fall in profits as it sells assets to pay for the Gulf of Mexico oil spill. Hello and welcome you with World Business Report. I'm Sally Bundock. Also in the programme, it's a done deal in the lucrative social networking business in China. Alibaba buys a stake in Weibo. We will discuss that. But first, a Canadian company, Loblaw, has joined clothing retailer Primark in saying it will compensate the victims of the collapsed Bangladesh factory where hundreds of people died. Loblaw, which had some products for its Joe Fresh clothing line made in one of the garment factories in the building, said in a statement, "We are working to ensure that we will deliver support in the best and most meaningful way possible, with the goal of ensuring that victims and their families receive benefits now and in the future. Our priorities are driving change to help prevent similar incidents in the future." The announcement by Loblaw follows a similar move by UK retailer Primark, who pledged to provide long-term aid for children who lost parents, financial aid for the injured and payments for families of the victims. There's some real concern that this latest disaster will force Western retailers to reconsider doing business in Bangladesh, which relies on garment trade for 80% of its exports. I'm joined by Judy Gerhardt, who's Executive Director of International Labour Rights Forum in Washington. She's joining us via webcam. Judy, thanks for being on the programme.
Hi, thanks, Sally.
Companies now are taking responsibility, which is good news, isn't it, in terms of where the individuals are at that are victims of this case. But Judy, if you can just give us a sense of where the rights are of these individuals who have been affected by this.
Well, it's really horrible. We've just finished having a worker tour here with one of the victims from the Tazreen factory fire, which happened on November 24th of last year, and 112 workers died in that fire. The victim who came with us to 10 different cities in the U.S., Shumi Abedin, young woman, she jumped from a window literally so that her parents would be able to find her body. Some of the people she jumped with did not survive the jump. She broke a leg and an arm. She received compensation of $1,200, essentially the equivalent of $1,200. And she said 75% of that went to medical coverage. The rest covered about 5 months of expenses. So she's already now virtually without anything to live on other than her family's support. She's not ready to go back to work because of her physical injuries. And she's not exactly mentally prepared to go back into a factory to begin with. So that's just one example of where these compensation packages are going at the moment. We're really excited to hear the announcement from Primark and Loblaw, because what that means is that there's the possibility of building a more appropriate compensation package for the families of the deceased workers and for the injured workers themselves. I wish we could get some of the U.S. brands whose products were found in the Tazreen fire, and also some of the labeled products from U.S. brands in the Rana complex to come forward, like Primark has in Loblaw's. The next step is to really get them to participate in a much more rigorous program to make change on the ground in Bangladesh.
Exactly. I was going to say, Judy, because that is going forward where things have to change, isn't it? It's the actual safety of these factories that have to be a real priority, and international companies making sure that that's the case before they do business with Bangladesh. But the issue as well is for the economy in Bangladesh that's so reliant on garment trade.
Well, we're very clear. We're not telling brands to leave Bangladesh, by no means. We're looking at this as global brands have benefited and profited from investing and buying product from Bangladesh for a long time. They need to stick around and help clean up the mess that's been created by an industry that has just grown up too fast and really helter-skelter, with a government not capable of policing companies like the Rana complex. They didn't have a building permit to go beyond a couple stories, and they were 8 stories high. So, this kind of development based on low wages and low investment, lowest possible investment infrastructure, that's got to change, and we hope the brands will stick it out. We're pushing for brands to sign a fire and building safety agreement, which would be essentially a contractual commitment to work with their suppliers to make the changes that need to be made to keep workers safe. And it would include much more transparency than exists now, and it would be something that involves local trade unions and international trade unions in the change process. Because right now what we have is we have a lot of programs that are sidelining workers in the solution.
All right, Judy Gerhardt, thank you very much indeed for your time, Executive Director of International Labour Rights Forum. Now, before we move on, I'd just like to make an apology if you're watching us right now and seeing all sorts of images appear on your screen. As you can tell, we're having technical problems this morning, so bear with us as we try and continue with a live broadcast whilst we have technical difficulties, so do stay with us. As you can see, as I was talking to Judy, you saw Rico appear now and then, and he's waiting to talk to us about a big deal in the e-commerce industry in China. Nice to see you, Rico. Thank you for your patience. Just tell us about Alibaba looking to get a stake in Weibo. This is quite a big move, isn't it, for both companies?
Absolutely. This is a very aggressive move for Alibaba, taking an 18% stake, Sally, worth about $600 million US in Weibo, which is basically the Twitter of China. And it is expected to help Alibaba drive traffic from Weibo, which is more than 500 million users. That's a lot of users, Sally, to its e-commerce sites, such as the very popular Taobao.com. It will also help generate additional advertising revenues for Weibo. And according to the two companies, the partnership will bring in $380 million more in advertising and social commerce service revenue for Weibo over the next 3 years. And the very popular Jack Ma, who is the chairman of Alibaba, is very optimistic about this deal, saying that this strategic alliance helps to create a stronger Weibo and affirm the importance of social media in unleashing value in e-commerce activities. And according to the deal, Alibaba will have the right to increase its ownership in the company to 30% going forward. So this is a win-win situation for both Alibaba and Weibo.com. Sally.
Thanks very much, Rico. Thanks for filling us in on that. Now let's talk about what's happening as far as today's big earnings story is concerned. We're looking at BP. Of course, it's the oil giant, and the ongoing fallout from the Gulf of Mexico disaster is expected to overshadow its results for the first quarter of this year. We'll get them in a few hours, and it's likely to say that profits were down some 30% to $3.27 billion in the first 3 months of this year. Now, the explosion on the Deepwater Horizon rig 3 years ago this month, where 11 people died, could end up costing the company up to $90 billion. BP has sold more than $38 billion worth of assets to raise funds for the compensation payout. The company is still embroiled in a court case in New Orleans, which will determine the share of blame between BP and its partners. Well, I'm joined by Nick McGregor, oil analyst at Redmayne Bentley Stockbrokers. Nice to see you, Nick. Now, let's talk about BP. All attention is on the Gulf of Mexico disaster and the continued fallout from that. Will we get much information about that today in terms of what it's costing them?
I think we'll get very little. What we'll get from BP is a statement in the results highlighting that this litigation is ongoing and saying that they can't quantify at this stage what the costs will be. What is evident is that the provisions BP have left out of the original $40 billion they set aside certainly aren't going to cover it.
So in terms of the fall in earnings, that's a big fall in 1 quarter. We are expecting this to continue because, of course, the liability is still there for BP?
Well, the fall in earnings is more about the fact that BP is facing higher costs, lower oil prices and lower production as it's hived off some of those assets that it's sold. The idea was that we'd have a slimmed down and more profitable and focused BP. And what a lot of people look for in the results really today isn't so much the Deepwater Horizon issues, it's more about the strategy going forward as to how they're going to grow what's left of the company.
And that's what we want to know, isn't it? What is the future for BP and some of its peers as it becomes more difficult to get oil out the ground, it's more sparse? What are they going to say about that? Why should we be more, stay interested as a shareholder in BP?
BP, I think, are going to highlight 2 big areas today. The first one is some of the work that they're doing in Africa, where they're starting to invest really serious amounts of money in Angola, for example. And the second, of course, is Russia, where the swap that they've done that now gives them 20% nearly of Rosneft, the vast state-owned concern, and whether that will open doors for BP to be a first mover of the Western oil companies in Russia.
And in terms of BP as a part of pension funds, it's a big player, isn't it? Certainly for UK viewers, many of them may not be aware that they're an investor in BP.
It's very hard not to be an investor in BP, especially, as you say, if you're in the UK. But a huge number of their shareholders, for example, are in the States. So people through unit trust they may own, pensions, ISAs, all of these sorts of vehicles tend to find that they have some exposure to BP, even if they've never actually gone out and bought the shares directly.
All right, Nick, thank you very much indeed for your time. And thank you very much indeed for bearing with us here as we continue to carry on with the live programme. As you can see, technical difficulties are hampering us this morning. But stay with us here on the BBC as we continue to keep you up to date with all the latest stories. We'll see you very soon for a look at the papers. Hello. Let's bring you the top stories this hour on BBC News. Now, in just a few hours, the people of the Netherlands will have their first king for more than 100 years. Queen Beatrix will abdicate in favour of her eldest son, Willem Alexander. His Argentine wife, Maxima, will become queen. The American student who was cleared of murdering British student Meredith Kercher in Italy 3 years ago has protested her innocence on American television. Last month, the Italian authorities overturned Amanda Knox's acquittal and intend to retry her. 2 international companies have said that survivors who worked for their suppliers in the Bangladesh textile factory which collapsed last week and relatives of those who perished will be compensated. And Michael Jackson's family has been outlining its case against concert promoters AEG. The family claims that the company was responsible for hiring Dr. Conrad Murray, who was convicted of killing Jackson. And the family is suing AEG for hundreds of millions of dollars.
Okay, it's time for the newspaper review. This is where Sally and I look at the stories which are making headlines around the world. We're going to begin with the Wall Street Journal, which has a farewell wave from Queen Beatrix. Her picture's on many of the front pages today.
Looking lovely.
Looking very lovely. She's obviously handing over power from herself, obviously, to her son, Willem Alexander. We'll talk more about that. We'll get hold of Kamala Dumont, our colleague, who's out in Orange Square in Amsterdam, a little later on.
Now, some of the other news in the papers. Syria's Prime Minister escaped a brazen assassination attempt when a bomb exploded near his convoy in Damascus, of course. That's the story that occurred yesterday, and the Gulf News is reporting on that. It's on its front page today.
Spain's army of unemployed just got one larger as Santander's CEO has stood down over controversy about his criminal record. El País notes his €88 million pension pot should soften the blow. I would think so.
Luxembourg is ready to share information about multinationals' bank accounts with other jurisdictions, if I can get my words out, in an effort to shed its tax haven image, so says today's Financial Times.
Scientists believe that they've discovered what the world used to smell like before the arrival of complicated animals, rotten eggs and blocked drains, says the Times.
Are we regarded as a complicated animal then? The human, I would imagine we are. And laugh all you like, but a University of Stirling study has found that women deem funnier men to be more attractive, but only for a fling, apparently. Researchers also found men thought humour in women was a sign that she will be receptive to his advances. We're all still trying to figure that out.
There's a revelation. Funny men are attractive. Jane Foley, Senior FX Strategist at Rabobank, is with us. Jane, always lovely to have you with us.
Jane.
Good morning. We're going to speak to Kamala, but briefly, Rabobank is a Dutch bank, isn't it? So it must be quite excited. I understand you're going to have celebrations.
I think we are.
Today.
I imagine that our canteen will be more orange than normal today. So a little bit of a celebration for Rabobank on this news today.
Well, lots of pictures. We're going to be speaking to Kamala later on about that, who's out there. Also, the Syrian Premier has managed to escape an assassination attempt. When it comes to Syria, it's quite interesting that it's not impacting on the markets as much as it was, and I suppose this is because of the impact that it's not having on the oil price.
Well, precisely. I mean, oil is very focused on growth, and the market's a little bit concerned that growth is slowing, so that's taken pressure off oil, and therefore it's not affecting people's pockets so much. So what we've been seeing over the winter in Syria is really quite distressing. You know, children in need, children without blankets, children without food, and yet the markets really are not that concerned at the moment.
Let's have a look at El País now, and basically looking at the fact that the CEO of Santander leaves with a big pension pot. It's funny, actually, the paper says €88 billion pension pot by mistake. It should be million, because
it's enough, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
I wouldn't
it's still
mind
fairly
that.
large, but 88 billion, you could probably bail out the Spanish economy. But anyway, talk to us about this story, because there's all sorts of intrigue and detail here, and of course Santander, a big player here in the UK.
It is a big player here in the UK. Now, what's happened here is that the chief executive has a criminal conviction. He pressured 4 debtors, and he has a conviction that stands for a false accusation. Now, he was actually told that he should go to prison for 3 months, but the government gave him a pardon. But the Supreme Court said, no, that's wrong, and his conviction stands. Now, again, the government put a decree and said that a banker who has proved his honourability should still be able to work. But again, this doesn't look good. This is an era after the financial crisis when bankers are trying to clean up their image. So it's not good for Spain or the Spanish government if they're saying, oh yes, but we'll make some exceptions. So at the end of the day, he's stepping down, and again, this is part of bankers wanting to.
And it's an interesting scenario, isn't it? Because he presided over a period where Santander was getting bigger and bigger, seen to be very successful bank. Because I remember at the beginning of the financial crisis, the Spanish banking system was seen as fairly solid, ironically, wasn't it, in the very beginning? Obviously, things have changed dramatically. Also, but it's an interesting scenario, isn't it, where he's clearly done a job running the bank, but obviously there are problems.
Well, he has got a good legacy. He has really expanded this bank, and it has got a big footprint outside Spain, which really is one of its strengths. I mean, it's certainly not one of the weaker banks within Spain, of which, of course, there are many. So he has got a strong legacy from that point of view. And, you know, he's 70, he leaves with a good pension, but in terms of banker's image, it's not good if he were to stay.
The guy who's taken over, Javier Marin, interesting as well that he's got quite an insurance slant. He was the head of the group's global insurance group, so and looking at closer ties for Santander in the future. So it'd be interesting to watch its strategy moving forward, I think. Yesterday we spoke about Luxembourg, didn't we? Luxembourg and I think the Netherlands. The foreign direct investment to those two countries totalled more than the US, the UK and Germany.
Combined, it was $5.8 billion.
Yes. It's a massive amount, and I wonder how much that has niggled away because of what's happening in the
perhaps because the point of that story was whilst the inward investment was so huge, it wasn't getting through to the real economy, meaning a lot of it was just sitting there in bank accounts. So what Luxembourg wants to do now is clean up its image and say that it's not taking in tax evasion money or tax avoidance money from corporates. So it just wants to make the whole image of its banking cleaner so people can actually see through and see where that money is going.
Do you think, when I read this story, it's about how the earth used to smell a long time ago. I don't know what the earth smells of now.
No.
I don't know what someone would say it smells of now. Maybe pollution, perhaps?
It depends where you are, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Depends where you are.
Yeah. But it used to be. Tell us more about this story.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one.
Well, this is, again, in Canada, scientists have looked at fossils, and they've looked at fossils where there has been some early signs of life, and it's looked at what's remaining on these fossils and said, well, the process that's gone through suggested that it would have released sulfur oxide, bad eggs, the same sort of smell that comes through our guts, apparently, and the same sort of smell that we see in drains. So they're saying that millions of years ago, that's what it would have smelt like, more or less everywhere.
So a breath of fresh air would have had a whole different meaning, that's for sure.
Yes. Breath of egg air. Is your partner funny?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
And sometimes he's grumpy.
Was it the funny side that attracted you? Because if it did, according to this research, you should only have had a fling with him.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be with him
But you know, it's interesting because this research is done on students. The students listened to voices and then the other students reported on voices, and maybe students are more likely to have a fling than a long-lasting relationship anyway, certainly if they're 18 or 20. So maybe there is a bias in this study, but I think it's true that we enjoy being around funny people.
I must admit, when I read the story, I thought of Roxanne, the movie with Steve Martin.
Oh, he wins.
And Daryl Hannah. He was the funny man.
He was the funny man,
as opposed to the.
I think
the good-looking man.
Yeah.
Funny of any sex is better than grumpy.
I think so.
At least.
I think so. I think we all have to agree on that.
Jane.
A very sensible look at that story, Jane, pointing out the fact they're all students.
Thank you very much.
Surveyed.
Thank you very much,
Our
Jane.
survey
Always good
says.
to have you with us.
Pleasure. It's
Thanks
lovely to
very
be
much.
here.
And enjoy the celebrations with Rabobank.
I will do.
Of course, celebrating Queen Beatrix's abdication and the arrival of Willem Alexander. Well, you would never not put him where a party is. Comme le Dumour is in Amsterdam's Orange Square, ready for the celebrations. Hiya.
Hello, Naga, and hello, Sally, and good morning to you, Jane. Well, you know what? Look, you guys have been talking about all these financial stories, but I can tell you, on the front pages of most of the papers here, they're not talking about the Greek banking crisis. They're not talking about the financial crisis in Europe. They are not talking about how much bankers are being paid as bonuses. There's only one story in town, and that is the transition of sovereign power. We're just hours away from this very special moment in this country when Queen Beatrix will abdicate the throne and then pass on the authority of the monarch to her son, Willem Alexander. As you can see behind me, there's a bit of preparation going on. I'm in a location called Orange Square, where there's going to be a lot of partying and musical concerts, but about 2 million people are expected in the city center to celebrate this very momentous occasion in the country's history. So let's get to the papers now and take a look at how they are covering this all-important story. And I want to start with this paper, Die Telegraaf. Now, you know very well that my Dutch is no good, but so I've written a bit of a translation here. And what this says here is faithful to the fatherland. It's the second verse of the national anthem. We move on to this paper. As you can see, a picture of the royal family, incredibly photogenic, and you're going to be seeing quite a bit of that throughout the day. And then one more, the man who will be king. There he is on the front page of The Weekend. Now, I want to turn again to my guest for the newspaper review, Daniela Pinheiro, who has covered the royal family for the leading national publication. What kind of man is he on a more personal level?
I think Willem Alexander is a very social man. He's done a lot of social projects throughout the years. He's also a very accessible, approachable man. He says, for example, If people want to call me Willem-Alexander rather than Majesty, for example, they can if I'm at a working visit, and I don't want them to stumble over their words. And he said I'm not a protocol
He doesn't have a protocol fetish. I think he said that in his interview.
I couldn't come up with the word. So that's perhaps a bit different from his mother, who was less approachable, as is often regarded as such. So that's something. And he has also a sense of humor. When he was asked why he doesn't want to be called King Willem IV, he said, because I don't want to be a number. I don't want to be like standing next to cow Bertha right. in the meadows.
Good joke. Yeah. Let's talk about it some more. Daniela Pinheiro, thanks for being with us. We'll be bringing you more live from Amsterdam.
Hello once again. With clearing skies and winds just beginning to ease down, it looks as though Tuesday is going to start on a pretty chilly note. That could be one of the features of this week, some quite cold nights across southern parts, but there will be some sunshine in these southern areas. Further north, you're in with a bigger shout, I'm afraid, of having some rain and some strong winds at times as well. Been a blustery couple of days across the north with this low pressure very close by. Thankfully now moving over towards Scandinavia. High pressure building in from the south, tending to kill off the showers and clearing the skies as well. And as the breezes fall light, Tuesday is certainly going to start on a pretty chilly note. Now the towns and cities for the most part should get away frost-free. However, in the countryside, well, prone areas may well see temperatures even lower than those that I'm suggesting there. But at least you've got clear skies, so there will be some sunshine to start off the day. Having said that, it looks as though the cloud will just begin to develop as the day goes on, and I think we'll find sufficient cloud for there to be 1 or 2 showers. No great organisation about them at all. And in fact, many of the southern counties, away from the coastal fringes, will be in for a warm, fine day. I say the coastal fringes simply because the Channel coast will be exposed to breezes, onshore breezes coming in from cold water, 7 or 8 degrees only in many locations. Once you're into the top end of Wales, northern end of the Midlands, up across the Pennines, chance of isolated showers here. Northern Ireland, the odd stray one, you couldn't rule out 1 or 2 in the northern half of Scotland too. But otherwise, it's largely fine. With sunny spells for many. Decent day in prospect. And then we bring another area of low pressure in close by to the northwestern corner of Scotland. Gale force winds and exposure across the far north, but further south again the skies will be clear, the breezes will be light, and as a consequence in the towns and cities it gets fairly cool, but certainly in the countryside again we may well see a little bit of mist and some frost as well. This is the overall setup as we see it on Wednesday. Low pressure again close by to the north of Scotland. A lot of isobars there, so quite windy conditions. This weather front brings some cloud and rain for a time, and then things buck up across the north of Scotland. The weather front strung out through Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, the far north.
Oh, sorry, here you go.
Much further south, it's a dry prospect, not too much in the way of breeze. Again, the temperatures will push quite nicely towards 16, 17 degrees. Just the threat of a shower or two getting into the far southeast, but essentially it's the north that sees the bulk of the cloud through Thursday on into Friday. Bits and pieces of rain perhaps. Further south, dry and fine. This is potentially what's going to happen on Friday. Big area of low pressure could turn wet and windy.
My name is Bert Middleton. And this is my story.
This is our farm. I will not let it go.
Watch the series So Far.
My job!
On BBC iPlayer now.
What will everyone be talking about tomorrow?
With BBC News, you don't need to wait to find out.
We'll tell you which stories are making the front pages.
And explore the stories behind the headlines.
That's The Papers with me, Clive Myrie.
Or me, Martine Proxel, and our panel of expert guests.
Every night after the news at 10 on the BBC News Channel.
I think it's a highly political book in its own way, but not that you would ever know that as you're reading it, because everything is in the characterisation, and the genius of it is that the whole story is seen through a little girl's eyes. So what you get is this innocent sheen over some dreadful and dark events. Yet, because it's filtered through Scout's eyes, you can somehow face it in a way that maybe if it was more visceral, more grittily written, would be too hard to take.
cultural exchange. Creative minds shared their inspiring moments on BBC Radio 4.
If you need to know, now. If you're asking, what's next? If the latest is vital. If you have to follow every development. If you want every headline, anytime. If the story matters wherever you are. If the news is part of your life, keep it with you. If you need to know, now. If you're asking, what's next? If the latest is vital. If you have to follow every development. If you want every headline, anytime. If the story matters wherever you are. If the news is part of your life, keep it with you.
Hello, this is BBC World News. I'm Naga Munchetty. Here are the headlines. In just a few hours, the people of the Netherlands will have their first king for more than 100 years. Queen Beatrix is going to abdicate in favour of her eldest son, Willem Alexander. His Argentine wife, Maxima, will become queen.
Discuss that, but first. A Canadian company, Loblaw, has joined clothing retailer Primark in saying it will compensate the victims of the collapsed Bangladesh factory where hundreds of people died. Loblaw, which had some products for its Joe Fresh clothing line made in one of the garment factories in the building, said in a statement, "We are working to ensure that we will deliver support in the best and most meaningful way possible, with the goal of ensuring that victims and their families receive benefits now and in the future. Our priorities are driving change to help prevent similar incidents in the future." The announcement by Loblaw follows a similar move by UK retailer Primark, who pledged to provide long-term aid for children who lost parents, financial aid for the injured and...
The American student who was cleared of murdering British student Meredith Kercher in Italy 3 years ago has protested her innocence on American television. Last month, the Italian authorities overturned Amanda Knox's acquittal and intend to retry her. Two international companies have said that survivors who worked for their suppliers in the Bangladesh textile factory, which collapsed last week, and relatives of those who perished will be compensated. Michael Jackson's family has been outlining its case against concert promoters AEG. The family claims that the company was responsible for hiring Dr. Conrad Murray, who was convicted of killing Jackson. The family's suing AEG for hundreds of millions of dollars. Those are the latest headlines from BBC World News. Now for the financial news with Sally.
Taking responsibility, Canadian retailer Loblaw joins Primark in saying it will compensate victims of the Bangladesh factory collapse. And BP gets set to announce a sharp fall in profits as it sells assets to pay for the Gulf of Mexico oil spill. Hello and welcome you with World Business Report. I'm Sally Bundock. Also in the programme, it's a done deal in the lucrative social networking business in China. Alibaba buys a stake in Weibo. We will payments for families of the victims. There's some real concern that this latest disaster will force Western retailers to reconsider doing business in Bangladesh, which relies on garment trade for 80% of its exports. I'm joined by Judy Gerhardt, who's Executive Director of International Labour Rights Forum in Washington. She's joining us via webcam. Judy, thanks for being on the programme. So,
Hi, thanks, Sally.
Companies now are taking responsibility, which is good news, isn't it, in terms of where the individuals are at that are victims of this case. But Judy, if you can just give us a sense of where the rights are of these individuals who have been affected by this.
Well, it's really horrible. We've just finished having a worker tour here with one of the victims.